Okay, good evening. I'll call the December 8th, 2021 meeting of the Manitou Springs Planning Commission to order. First item of business is approval of the minutes for the October 13th, 2021 meeting.
I move to approve.
Second. Okay. All in favor? Okay, that's 5 with 1 abstention. Next is November 10th, 2021 regular meeting minutes.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Okay,
I'm abstaining.
okay. All in favor? And 1 abstention there. Okay, moving along, we'll go right into our business meeting. I'll start by describing the process. I'll call an item for consideration. I'm forgetting our protocol. I was supposed to call the roll. So we'll back up here for a minute. Commissioner Wilson?
Present.
Commissioner Casey?
Present.
Commissioner Storm?
Present.
Commissioner Armstrong? Present. Commissioner Reagan?
Present.
Okay. And I'm Commissioner Delwich. Okay, with that, we'll move on for unfinished business. What I'll do, I'll call an item up for, one more thing, sorry. It's strange being back in this building. Got to get back in the groove. So, do we have any conflicts or ex parte conflicts to disclose? Okay, so finally we're back on track. So, I'll call an item for consideration, and planning staff will describe what the request was and what their analysis and findings were and what their recommendations are. Following that, the applicant will have an opportunity to state their case. And following that, we'll open the hearing to the public, and anybody in the public is entitled to state their opinion on the item under consideration. And after the public is spoken, we'll close the public hearing, and we will deliberate and we'll vote either to approve, deny, possibly postpone if necessary. And as we go through the process, we're guided by what's in our zoning code and subdivision code. We don't legislate, we just interpret what's in the code. We're not a lawmaking body, so we follow what's in the code. And so with that, I'll call the first item for consideration is item 3, variance 2115, a height variance 32 feet 4 feet where 25 feet is required. 423 Washington Avenue, Michael Paget and Kristen Cole applicants.
Good evening, commissioners. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. A little awkward being up here to the laptop, but just bear with me. So thanks for joining us this evening for this item.
I think you might need to be a little closer to the mic.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Maybe I can pull this around here. Okay, how's that? That's better.
Great.
So, yes, just to repeat the request, it is for property at 423 Washington Avenue. The applicant's proposing to build a single-family home in the general residential district. The maximum height requirement in that district is 25 feet, and they're proposing a design with 32 feet 4-inch height. So just a little bit of background. So this shows the property actually just right over there on Washington Ave. Nearby properties are Sunwater Spa and an adjacent residential structure that's affiliated with Sunwater just to the south. To the north is a single-family home. To the east are vacant lots. And to the west, of course, is 7 Minute Springs. And the lot is 4845 square feet. Some other, I guess, pertinent features are that this is a local historic district, the Lower Washington Historic District. There is vegetation on the site. I think I described it as sparse. There are some trees. It is a steep slope, so there's been some erosion there. And then this just shows topography in the area, which is, of course, a very prominent feature in that neighborhood. Very steep slope, sloping to the southwest. And so you can see similar condition for this property. There is sort of a flat plateau area that the applicant is utilizing for their patio outdoor space. But certainly a very steeply sloped neighborhood here. And I'll jump right into the variance request. The applicant had a very detailed set of drawings because they went to the Historic Preservation Commission first. And so we have a lot more information than we might usually have for a variance request. This is a section as viewed from the north to the south. And so we've got Washington Ave over on the right. The applicant was required to provide 2 parking spaces for this single-family home. And so they've created a flat area on that lower grade. There's actually an elevator on that grade as well. The applicant included the elevator in order to save interior space. And so that required that we measure, utilize that bottom grade to indicate the average finish grade. So to measure the grade, so I think this diagram does a good job of showing that. And let's see, some other features. So yeah, two floors. The first floor is 515 square feet, and the second floor is 895 square feet. The applicant also was required to provide some soil stability analysis studies, which were critical for this project. That also informed the height of that lower level. So the lower level height is based on the height of the elevator, but also the retaining walls for the structure. And so, as I mentioned, the applicant was required to go to the Historic Preservation Commission so that the building design could be reviewed as a new structure in this district. And so the HPC did approve this design. They did have 6 conditions. And Michelle Anthony presented this application, and she felt that they did really want to see this type of roof pitch. I think they were looking at this adjacent Alabama house as kind of a design that's prominent in the neighborhood. And so they did provide several conditions that HPC and staff will follow up on. And this is another graphic that was provided in the applicant's packet. I always like to provide some designs from the neighborhood so you can kind of see the array of styles and sizes, so look at both design and bulk. So it is pretty varied, and so there are some kind of cabin-style homes, some stucco homes, those very prominent stone homes, and then we have the Alabama house style, the wood frame as well. It's interesting, just something I'll relay that the applicant shared was that they actually originally just wanted to build a cabin, which of course is a common style in this area, but because of the parking, that required really a more complex design. And down here, you can see the existing slope, existing site. And so I just thought that I would provide the criteria in just a really summarized format. I couldn't get it all to fit on one slide, and I won't go over this in detail, but I'll focus on a couple of the criteria. The first criteria relates to hardship, and the applicant did note significant slopes and the need to provide parking on the site. Obviously, the historic homes didn't have to do that. We know that parking is, you know, a significant concern these days. The second criteria asks us to consider whether if there are no design alternatives or alternative locations for the structure. And it certainly agree with the conclusion by the applicant that there really aren't any other places on the site where you could put the home to try to reduce the height. We did discuss the proposed floor height with them, and just wondered if on the second floor it was possible to lower the ceiling a little bit. And what we learned was it could have been lowered by 1 foot. That didn't seem like it would create much difference in terms of the bulk of how the structure looked. But certainly the applicant's team could weigh in on that later. In terms of enforcement of provisions of the code, depriving the applicant of rights enjoyed by majority of other properties, there are certainly single-family homes, two-story homes in the neighborhood, and so that seemed, you know, certainly like the appropriate objective for this applicant. Reasonable protections afforded to adjacent properties. So in terms of impacts that could occur to other properties from the height issue, which is really what we're looking at, we consider views and maybe possibly shade. And really the lots to the northeast are not developed yet, not clear if they could be developed. And I'll just actually maneuver to this building again so you can see that. Let's see. So we were considering those lots to the northeast, which are very steep, not sure if they're buildable, but are not yet built on. And then criteria 6, and actually I'll note that for 5, of course, we did provide notice to the neighborhood and in the paper. We did not receive comments, a separate issue from this variance request. So I'll certainly be following up with that applicant on that comment and provide those comments to, with that neighbor and provide those comments to the applicant. And so overall, we felt that all of these criteria, that there was sufficient justification for them, and did recommend approval with these 3 conditions. And the first condition, we always include one, reinforcing the plan that we received to make sure that no more variance is sought through a building permit than what the commission has considered. Second condition relates to a utility pole adjacent to the home. The applicant is going to need to work closely with CSU to relocate that infrastructure, which also will be a real benefit to that streetscape as well, so that those lines are going to go further up the slope. And then we just wanted to ensure that the applicant circled back with staff and the HPC to complete all of the conditions from that approval. So I can answer questions, but probably it makes sense to defer to the applicant now to hear from them. Is that how we'd like to proceed?
We'll start by with you. And just for clarification, I don't know if you said it up front, but because this is in the HPC, in the historic district, it's only a 2-foot 4-inch variance because HPC can go up to 30. I don't know if you said that or not.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
The HPC allows one to go up to 30 feet. That's why it's not a 7-foot variance, it's a 2-foot.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
was not aware of that.
Yeah, I just think that's a value for clarification. So, other questions for staff before we move on? I just a couple other things I'm curious. Has a Tier 3 geohazard study been done? It's anything over 17% is supposed to have that. Has that been done, or is that done later in the process?
I don't know what tier was triggered by this
Okay.
application.
Okay, to me, when I look at it, it's way over 17%, so that would be a Tier 3. And then the other question would be, I guess following that, we'd understand if any subdivision waiver were required for building into the 30% slope?
No, because I think that only applies to a no-build that's defined through a plat process. And there was no no-build on this lot.
Okay, that's interesting. I was not aware that it's only in the plat process that we'd be considering that, because it seems like we are just into a 30% slope. But we can follow up later.
If the applicant has any information about that,
Okay,
certainly they
thank
could.
you.
they could-
Any other questions? Okay, then, the applicant, could state your name and address for the record. Oh, you have to push the little button to make it.
Okay, I'm here, my name is Electra Johnson, and I'm here representing Kristen Cole and Michael Paget, who are in Florida as their primary residence, but they're looking at making this one of their residences. My Manitou address is 327 Oak Place, but I'm in the process of building that, so my current residence is 2036 Ridgeway Avenue, Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Okay, so the floor is yours.
Would you hold that? All right, I do have a presentation for you. I am the designer for this project. You will see some of the same graphics, just so you know, but I wanted to walk you through it very clearly why we are requesting the variance, or why we're required to request the variance, and then why we're requesting it. All right, you can go to the next slide. All right, so you've seen this before. This is basically setting the precedent for some of the design and for the context of where it is. It is, as it turns out, the stairs that Sunwater Spa maintains, 4 feet of those stairs are on my client's property. And so we actually have a little bit more space, as Michelle Anthony informed us, for the floor plate. It's not a lot, but we're going to take a little bit more, but it's still not going to impede on those stairs. And it's going to, we're working with the existing levels. Go ahead, you can go to the next one. So this is the site as my clients have purchased it. On the left side, you'll notice the utility pole, which Karen did mention in her presentation. My clients are in the process of working with CSU to move that utility pole up the slope of the hill to the top. Not to the top, but sort of midway to the top. And it will still service Sophie's house, which you see on the top of the stairs, and Sunwater Spa. And this is the design that we are working from. It's sort of a modified craftsman design. So this is sort of the precedence that we're setting with the design and what we're using. The bottom right-hand side of the slide shows a similar plan, a similar color scheme And I just wanted to give you some context of what exists in the area and what we were drawing from for a precedent. Go ahead. So this is the slope, and because the floor plates are quite small, we have to cut into the hillside, and we're trying to cut as little as possible into the hillside. A tier 3 slope stability analysis will be required. We've done a slope stability analysis, but I don't believe it was to that level. Kristen Cole and Michael are working on getting the tier 3 slope stability analysis. Our structural engineer has already done a slope stability analysis, and that's where the cuts come from because the parking has to go back so far. The wall is quite high, and then it moves things back even further. So this shows the 2 entries. The lower level will be a guest space as well as a working office for my clients. And the upper level will be the primary living space. The floor plates are quite small because of the lot size, because of the setbacks, and because of what's available. You can go into the next one if you like. Sorry. I'm not used to, okay, I can? Okay. I'm sorry, I haven't spoken. Okay. All righty. Apologize, I haven't spoken to an actual group of living human beings in well over 2 years, so. Okay, so this is the view from the back side, basically from Sophie's house. That cutaway is obviously just the cutaway of the slope. It's not really a cutaway, it just shows the view and where the utility pole 1 location that we're looking at positioning it. The other location is to the left of that main entry door in that area between the 2 doors. So there's basically 2 locations that we're looking at placing the pole. Go ahead. All right, so these are the 5 reasons that we are requiring the variance. The actual number 1 reason is because we have to put in, well, okay. We don't have to put in an elevator, but because the height is such that we need some kind of conveyance system because the steepness of the stairway. And we looked at initially kind of a hill climber up the side of the stairs. And they wanted something enclosed, so this was a place that they could age in place, and this is a place that could be a family home that they can live in for as long as they need to. As even though Sophie, who lives up the hill, is quite elderly, those stairs are a little bit untenable for somebody to go up and down those stairs. So the elevator is really the reason we're requesting the variance, but these are the reasons that lead up to the elevator and the need for the variance. So number 1, the lot size is quite small. And the slope of the lot size requires that it needs to be in a certain specific area. And the setbacks, where we have no setback variance. Because of the off-street parking, we have to cut into the hillside pretty substantially, so then that wall puts everything back. We're trying to comply and to make it blend in with the rest of the neighborhood. So the roof pitch is the same as the Alabama building, the Sunwater Spa building. The structural requirements I will show you in these slides because of the initial slope stability analysis done by our structural engineer, Michael Neorsillo. We need to cut back substantially into the hillside, and so that's why we need to cut back so much. And then the vertical conveyance, which is the elevator, is requiring us to measure the living space from the lower level all the way up versus where the living space hits the site, which would be on the 2nd level. And so then we wouldn't need a variance. But because we're putting an elevator in, and that square of where the elevator hits that lower level is considered living space, it brings the measurement down, and then the top measurement comes down as well, if that makes sense. So go ahead. So this is the actual site plan. as submitted, or as submitted to the City of Manitou and hopefully submitted to Pikes Peak Regional as soon as we go through this process. Go ahead. So you'll see the stairs, if you go back real quick, you'll see the stairs that are shared by Sunwater Spa. There's a small area there so that we're set a little bit back from the stairs, and so there's a little bit of privacy between the two buildings. Go ahead. So this is the initial slope stability analysis, and this is his notes. These are the buttresses required, and then the actual, if you'll notice, there are basically a series of anchors that go up the hillside to hold the building into place. And that first dimension is 14'6", I believe, for the height, because we do require at least 22 feet to park a vehicle. Because of that, we have to go back so far into the hillside, and because we have to go back into the hillside, the height is such. We've already increased, if you'll notice, there is a slope increase from the bottom. It's not directly flat. There is a slope up to that. So we're not cutting directly into the hillside in a right angle. There is a slight angle to that so that that cut isn't quite so deep. Go ahead, Karen. Okay, so this is basically the existing grade. And again, if we did do the HBC 30-foot height, there would be no variance required whatsoever. And there would be no variance required just at the 25-foot height as well, because if you measured from the base of the living space versus the base of the elevator. So this is the base of the living space with the measurements from the structural engineer that are required to anchor it into the hillside. Okay, go ahead, Karen. Okay.
If the elevator wasn't on that bottom floor, it would actually just be a retaining wall, be considered a retaining wall at that point. So the elevator makes it an occupied space.
And that's really the heart of the issue, is that small footprint, which is the elevator, creates the occupied space. Now the upper floors, because that lower level also requires buttresses and requires being cut into the hillside, that lower level floor is already 10 feet. My clients could lower the upper level, but because it's so small, they wanted kind of a vaulted feeling space in that upper level as well. It's not large enough to actually have a lofted area up there unless it was quite short. But they would like to have it feel sort of open because they're up at that level. And it also captures a really amazing view of Pikes Peak up there too. And it's approximately in line with where the roof plane is for the Sunwater building as well. Like the roof pitch, the tip of the roof pitch. So this is the height over what we're requesting. Not over what we're requesting, this is what we're requesting. All right, so this one basically shows it's in compliance with the historic, and this is an image of what it will appear to look like. Again, it's superimposed, so it's not obviously going to look exactly like that, but the elevator's on the left side. We are going to be using as much of that green stone wall that exists that is there right now. I mean, it's spray painted and everything else, so it's going to need to be cleaned and reused, but we will use as much as we possibly can. Electrical easement, and what is holding that retaining wall back on that side is a series of railroad ties between the greenstone wall and the stairway, but it's going to need to be cut into, and then we're trying to create a space that is kind of an entry space, so you can tell that it's the entry to the building, and a little courtyard. There will probably be a couple of chairs and maybe some plantings down there. It won't quite be so spare. but go ahead. So this shows approximately, and it may be a little bit, I was trying to keep the perspective in line with sun, water, and also like from two different photographs, just so you could see how it would appear when it's finalized, and how it fits with the historical character of the actual Washington district, which is extremely varied too. As you know, there's a lot of buildings with no off-street parking. There are some buildings with off-street parking. There's cabins. There's ones that are oriented different. There are ones that are a little bit more contemporary. So there's a lot of variety within that Upper Washington Historic District, but we're trying to go within the historic guidelines and keep it relatively consistent in the variety, if that makes sense. Go ahead. Oop, is that it? Okay, so, and the color too, we were looking at Sun Water Spa, and we've talked to them extensively as well, and they're 100% willing to work with us with the design, and they've met Kristen and Michael several times and are very open to working with them and everything else. So, do you have any questions?
Any questions? Dave?
Electra, clarify if you would for me, when I look at the two buildings head-on, Alabama building and your clients, it looks like the total height from the entry to, well, the entry to their garage or parking and the Alabama building to the south to the Ridge Peak is actually, for your project, a bit less. The overall height is definitely not out of sync with the Alabama building.
That's correct. That's correct. It's very similar. And how I took that height, I basically took a laser. I mean, there's nothing historic as far as there's no plans. Sunwater has no plans. What I did is I took a laser measuring device, and I measured to the inside peak. Then I estimated what that fascia and soffit was, and I basically walked around the building trying to see if there was anything else poking up any higher. There's nothing to actually measure it from, and because the slope of Washington Avenue is from where that white van comes down quite steeply. It gets larger as it goes towards Sunwater, which of course is a commercial within the commercial district as well, but it's not dissimilar.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Electra. I just had a quick question that actually doesn't bear so much with your variance request, but it's idle curiosity. It's an attractive design, by the way. I was just wondering, between the two houses, you have the stairs that are right next to the Alabama house. What are those green terrace-like things on your side?
That was actually a bit of a confusion within our within our request, because it takes so much more to render a curved polyplane from the site plan. It's a lot easier to bump up a site plan every 6 inches to a foot. So that is literally the topography. And it's not stepping like that, it is a slope. So there was some confusion within the historic preservation. Those are not terraces. That is just an easier way to render with the software that I use. Instead of doing a drape over it, it just makes it, I don't have to wait 10 years for every rendering to come out. So that's what that is. So I apologize for that
No, don't worry.
misrepresentation, but that's essentially what it is.
When I
It's
was reading
topography.
this earlier today, I couldn't quite figure it out,
Yeah.
so thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Another off-topic question, but can you bury that power line versus moving the pole?
I think we've looked into that. I would have to have Kristen Cole and CSU. We've been working closely with CSU, and it's taken already like 3 months to just get to the point of being like close to being on their docket. I think that is, actually, I take that back. We did have that conversation. The cost for bearing it creates a huge transformer space, and so that electrical easement that is there would be much, much larger in that, where the railroad ties are. So I apologize for that. I don't have all of that information here. But yes, we have talked about bearing it versus moving the pole up the hill. We've been negotiating with CSU as to see what the most economical versus aesthetically pleasing and everything else. I mean, obviously, my clients would prefer to bury it if they can. It's just a matter of cost.
Okay, I was curious, the north setback, side setback, what is that?
That is actually, I believe that's at 7 feet, but Michelle Anthony informed us at our last meeting that I think one of the side setbacks can be a little smaller. I don't have that directly in front of me, so I can't reference it. But one of the side setbacks can be a little bit smaller. We are at 7 feet on that side to the
Oh,
property
On
line.
the, okay, yeah, the north side. I'm sorry, I meant the south side. It looks like you're significantly more than that.
We are significantly more than that, yeah. So 7 feet, so there's 4 feet within the stair area, and then another 3 feet is a little too encroaching. We may bring it in a little bit more, but we wouldn't be right to the setback, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just curious, if you were driven to have a larger setback because of the encroachment of those stairs, and was the applicant involved with installing those stairs? Because it seems like that's part of what you're working with, is those encroaching stairs.
That is correct. No, the applicant was not involved with that. The stairs have been there. The stairs, 4 feet of those stairs is on my client's property, and Sunwater has used and maintained them because they can't get up to their floors if they don't. The upper stair is in pretty awful condition on the very upper portion to Burns Road, but those stairs have been maintained by Sunwater. So what we were looking at initially and why the building is set the way it has and is, I haven't shifted it because I wanted to make sure we went through the whole variance process first. Initially, my understanding was that the setback was from the easement of the stairs, but when I spoke to Michelle Anthony, the setback is in fact from the middle of the stairs from the property line, and so we can move the building out a little bit, which still doesn't increase the floor plan that much, but it does increase it a little bit. And we will take a little bit of that space, but we're not going to be right up against that setback,
Yeah,
if that makes
but-
sense, because it's also a private residence, so we want it to feel like a private residence, if that makes
Okay,
sense.
Yeah, so you
Yeah.
do have that latitude if you had to. You could
Yeah,
go-
That's
You
correct.
could make use of the legitimate 7.5 feet rather than about 11 feet that you're.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, and could we go back to the slide that showed the different heights? I have a couple questions there. No, the next one back, I think. Yeah, that one. That blue line on the top floor?
The dark blue line?
Yeah, is that the top of the ceiling?
No,
I'm-
that is the spring point for the, where the beams are basically intersecting the wall. So that's the top of the plate.
Okay, but, so the actual floor height there, the ceiling height is 13 feet, is what
Well, we are putting some decorative beams in there, so I'm not entirely sure what it's going to be because it's required to have an R49 insulation because of the 2017 IECC, the energy code. For R49 is fairly substantial. I mean, that's like a relatively deep insulating pocket for the roof between the trusses, between the truss bays. So the truss bays need to be moved up a little bit, but my clients also want some exposed trusses in there so that it feels lofted. If they're going to invest the time and the money into building a structure like this, they want it to feel, they want it to have some kind of openness. So the floor plane and the floor plan doesn't allow that. So they wanted a little bit of openness, especially because this is like the place that captures the view and everything else. So everything doesn't feel crammed in there because it's such a small floor plan.
Okay, so the elevator actually, how far up above that
Well, that's
The-
the other, yeah, that's the other reason that the roof plane is where it is because there's a housing to operate the elevator unit. And there's two housings. One is on the lowest level in kind of a utility closet so that there doesn't need to be a pit below the elevator. And then there is an elevator space above that needs to be, so it doesn't stand out enormously. There's a space to operate the elevator that's above the actual housing of the elevator, if that makes sense. So the roof plate is moved up to enclose that and to camouflage that so it blends in with the design and doesn't look like a big giant Lego block in front of the building. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
yeah,
Okay.
so the it could actually be lower than by a foot or two, or
What could be lowered?
the elevator
No,
mechanism?
no. The elevator mechanism is where the elevator mechanism is. It can't be lowered from where it is specifically, but to camouflage the elevator housing, it moves everything up a little bit. And because it moves everything up a little bit, so a lot of this design is driven by a number of things. Number one, parking. That moves into structural. Then you've got the elevator. The elevator housing causes the height. So all of these things are sort of built on, they're building blocks built on one on the other to create the design. So the design is pretty regimented in the parameters that can be used for the design because of all of these specific issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just
Okay.
trying to understand, there was a statement that it could be a foot lower.
Well, the ceiling height could be lowered, but then the elevator sticks above the roof plane.
It's 6 above the,
Yeah, you end up with a big box.
okay. Okay, sorry, if you're going to speak, that's fine, but you need to state your name and address for the record.
Sorry about that. My name is Tom Bryant. My address is 101 Fairview Avenue, Manitou Springs.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, and Tom is the contractor building this building, so.
Okay, so what you're saying is that in order to lower the roof, you would have this sticking up?
Yes.
Okay,
And then it doesn't look like the rest of the historic buildings on,
Yeah.
you know, it certainly doesn't blend with the plan on the route, on the Alabama house and all of that.
Yeah.
So, it just, the pitch has to shift, or it has this giant thing sticking up right there.
okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Carrie?
So what's the height difference from the top of the elevator box to the top pitch of the roof?
I have to go back and look at that graphic. Karen, can you bring it back to the front elevation?
I think that's what Alan was trying to get to. So I hear what you're saying about the framing and the operation of the elevator, but what is,
Okay, so the elevator, if you see in the back, that's where the elevator goes up a little higher, and we're trying to mitigate that by dropping that front area down a little bit so that you don't see it quite as much from the street. I have to go to my drawings to look at that. I don't have that measured out here. But I'm guessing, actually, if you go to the side view, we do have the measurements, and I can kind of guesstimate what it is. Okay, so 4 feet, it's about 4 feet. It's about 4 feet, although it sort of fits within that pitch of the housing. if that makes sense.
So I see you've got a double pitch, right?
Yes,
And so the first pitch conceals it, the second
yes,
pitch is 2 feet above it?
yes. Well, the second pitch is 4 feet above that, and then that second pitch, the way that works is that angle is where that housing fits into that second pitch. That's why the second pitch is there. The second pitch is there for 2 reasons. One, because the truss bays and an R48 requires a certain amount of height between the trusses to get to an R49. The second reason is because the elevator housing is such that it needs to fit into that bay. And then the third is to meet the design standards for the historic preservation, so that it's got the same pitch as the other buildings on the street. It needs to have a rise. If you have the elevator in the very middle, then you have no view. And then there's no point in, I mean, you can't see anything. You do have the height, but then you can't see anything, if that makes sense. It blocks the entire,
Right, no, I understand.
yeah, okay. We did
Electra,
try that, by the way.
Could we point out where the housing is? Is the housing this area here?
Yeah, above there, right above there. So see where that floor plate is right there? Right above there is one housing, and then there's basically 2 mechanisms for the elevator. The other one, if I don't believe, actually, if you go to the front elevation, I can show you where the other one exists. So there's got to be something on the bottom and something on the top to operate the elevator. And so instead of doing a pit, there's a door beside the elevator, so you'll see the door to the left of the car, and then the door. There's basically a utility closet down there, and the utility closet would have all the electrical, the plumbing, the cleanouts for the septic, or not the septic, the sewer, and all of the utilities in there in an area that is enclosed and accessible. But the main point of having that extra utility space is literally to house, it requires a 3x3 by 3 block pit piece that operates the elevator that can be beside it. The other one is above it, and you'll see those 2 lines above, and so that's essentially where the upper one is and then where the lower one is. So a lot of this is driven literally because of the elevator, and the elevator is driven because of the slope.
Okay, so basically, you could drop it by a foot and keep all the functionality and obscure the elevator and keep this design. It would just be,
You would have a bump out on the left side. So you see where that line is? That's the top of the elevator housing. So you could drop it, but then you basically have that corner of the structure bumping up on the left side. So yeah, it could be dropped by a foot, but then it gets slightly more complicated. It's not obscured, if that makes sense. You could still camouflage it somewhat with the fascia and the soffit and all of those types of things, but you would have essentially like a bump on the top, and then the roof planes aren't quite as clean, et cetera.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. If we have more questions, we'll bring you back.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Now the public hearing is open to the audience. If anybody would like to comment on this, now is the time. Okay, I see nobody jumping up to the mic, so I will close the public hearing. And we're ready to discuss. Or thoughts? Tip?
I actually quite like this proposal. I appreciate the fact that the request is really for 2 feet, not the amount that was written in here. to me, the 2 feet thing is in a way mitigated by some other trade-offs. The fact that this building is going to have the off-street parking, unlike almost any of the other, I walk this area all the time, unlike almost any of the other buildings on the street, I think is a huge benefit. I think that's really great. The fact that they're going to be moving the pole, I think is also a really good contribution. I would love it if they could put it underground. I understand how expensive that can be. You remember that I tried to push the Sun Water to underground, and they, I think we made a mistake in not requiring it, frankly. But they claimed that it was too expensive, and we did not follow through. I think that would have been reasonable for a big business. But in any case, I think the fact that they're trying to work with that is a possibility, but we'll be moving it. And I think that the benefit to have the pitched roof that fits in with the neighborhood, it doesn't, one thing I appreciate is that this building doesn't pretend to be built at the time of the other buildings. You can still see that it's a contemporary building, so it has that historical distance. I think that's important, but it's still, you want it to be in conversation with the rest of the neighborhood. And I think to have the bump out to bring it down 1 foot would be somewhat unfortunate to the design feature of having the double pitched roofs. So all that said, I'm inclined to approve it at this point, depending on what conversation everybody else offers.
David?
Is regarding the bump out that's caused by the housing for the upper housing for the elevator. This just repeats something that was already said, is that would not be consistent with the existing architecture in the neighborhood. To pierce that sloped roof with a rectangular housing for the elevator. So that to me would be a big mistake. And I think the head-on view, even though it's not entirely accurate from the west, tells the tale for me. It fits in beautifully with the existing neighborhood, and I think the Historic Preservation Commission did a good chunk of our work here for us.
I just wish everything, when we had a variance, went before the Historic District Committee first, just because the packet's so nice. I mean, with all we've got so many additional things to look at. I really appreciate that. I really do think the design will fit in. Doesn't look like it would overwhelm the area. I would be inclined to support it.
Any other thoughts? I initially was a little ambivalent of it, but I think the explanation for obscuring that elevator shaft will, it makes me comfortable. I agree that it would be pretty ugly to have that sticking out. I regret that there's not a way to avoid the elevator, but that's my thought.
I'll go ahead and make a motion. Is it time? To approve variance 2115 with all staff's findings and recommendations.
I'll second. If there's no more discussion, we can vote. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, so that's approved. And we'll move on. Next item is review of the Planning Commission updated standard operating procedures. And I think, if I read the packet right, there's really no update on that unless something's changed since we got the packet. So this will be carried on to probably our next meeting or future meetings. And the next item is discussion regarding the setback requirements and height in the commercial zone. And is someone from planning staff going to be leading this, or where are we?
So you have the memo from Michelle Anthony where she's making certain recommendations as far as increasing the front setback to 15 feet in the commercial zone. It's currently 10. And let's see, what was the height? And her change to the height recommendation as well. Code actually requires that the Planning Commission has 15 days to review the ordinance that is attached in your packet. So this will come up as an action item on the January agenda. But tonight, if you're more than welcome to discuss the items in that ordinance.
Okay. Is everybody familiar with why this is before us? You know, this was sort of triggered by, there was a suggestion that we should have a building moratorium on commercial development until the zoning code update is done. And we've, you know, after council deliberated, they didn't have a majority that would support that, and the compromise was to consider putting some, reducing the requirements for commercial until that, you know, and possibly it'll be reinstated after the code update is done, but the concern was that people were unhappy with some recent developments that feel too big for Manitou, basically, and so the idea was to prevent that from happening again. So this proposal from Michelle is a start, and we can kick it around and consider what else we want to. One of the things that I'll point out is that as proposed here, I don't think it would actually stop the creation of another thing like the thing that everybody doesn't like. And the reason is, in the URA, it's got its own overlay standards, which there are other ways that they could get that 5-foot bonus. So simply doing what's proposed here would not be sufficient to reduce it. And so that's, you know, point one. You know, if they meet two design objectives, they are entitled to get a 5-foot setback bonus and a 5-foot height bonus. So there are a lot of ways that we could be right back where we are and be unhappy with another development. So you know, it seems to me that what's really needed is to look at that overlay as well as this, and also maybe, you know, discuss is just saying you can only go to 35 feet sufficient, or is that, you know, it seems like in some of the discussions we've had in the work sessions, there was a lot of interest in pushing height back farther. So a possibility would be to, you know, push the setback to 20 feet and reduce the height to 30 feet. So I'll just open up by just tossing that out and get everybody's thoughts.
Alan, how did these numbers get pulled together? Was this just a recommendation from Michelle, or was this council's discussion? Where did this come from?
Yeah, this was Michelle's suggestion, that she looked at the criteria that was used for that other building, and basically they got this 5-foot boost in height because they had a stepped roof line. And so they just followed the code, and that's why we approved it. David?
So council is the only one who can institute these restrictions at this point, right? So what would our purview be? And one, that'd be one thing, and two, what is there, do you have a specific proposal?
Well, you know, the process is that there will be a proposed ordinance at our next meeting, and we'll get, you know, we'll have time to look at it and contemplate. There wasn't enough time for this meeting for us to have that due diligence, so that's why it's pushed to the next meeting. So what we have on the table tonight is just discussion, and we can still inform the planning department, and of course, council will hear this too, if we have thoughts on what our wisdom is and what our experience and what we would recommend. So, you know, my thinking is this is a template, but I would go a little more aggressive in terms of front setback, and also I would entertain reducing the height to 30 feet rather than 35. You know, ultimately, we may come up with some more elaborate thing in the code update, maybe, you know, for the first 25 feet, the max would be 30, and then farther back you could be higher. That's still, you know, being contemplated and discussed. But the other thing is I would want to, in this ordinance, include something temporarily suspending the URA overlay bonus conditions, which could get us right back in this. And just another factoid that I just learned that we didn't know, or at least I wasn't aware of when we did this development back in 2018, was the fact that, you know, you look at the building now and it's like, oh my God, it's right there. That's not even 10 feet. Well, it's 10 feet from it's 11 feet from the property line, but the problem is the property line is right in the middle of the sidewalk. So that was something we didn't realize, that the sidewalk was there. And so one of the things that's being contemplated for the code update is to say that setbacks are from the property line or from the developed right-of-way, sidewalk, street, whichever is more restrictive. So anyway, that was another factor that got us messed up.
Well, it sounds to me like this feedback from Alan, I'm not competent right at this moment to comment on myself. Karen and Dylan needs to go back to the planning department and Michelle. I realize we're without a planning director once again, which makes it tough on all of you. But and Michelle was quite ill with COVID. But those comments need to be conveyed to the planning department, right?
Yeah, and that's what we're doing right now is we're coming up. And so I'd like to hear if other thoughts, Tip?
Before I speak more to the proposal, I just wanted some clarification. It's still not clear to me. Next time, there's going to be a proposal that we will be discussing and voting on, right? Does that proposal then go to the city council to be decided?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
so we're proposing to the city council.
Yeah, well, basically, the way the zoning code, where it talks about updating the zoning code, it says changes to the code will be reviewed by the commission, and then their recommendation will go on to council, and council, of course, is a decider in all these cases. So whatever we see next month, we can certainly say, oh, this is terrible, and we want to do this other thing. You know, we're recommending, but at least we follow the process where we get this time to see the ordinance. And the decision was that there wouldn't be enough time from when this came up, so that all we could do at this time was do a discussion. And at least we're sort of kicking it around and getting our thoughts out there, and if we want, we can say, the minutes of our discussion will be there to inform planning staff and also city council.
Thank you, that's much clearer in my mind now. So I guess to that, one thing I would like to express to the city council just from my own, where I'm sitting, is that I am disappointed that it chose not to undertake a moratorium and kick this back. It's sort of like kicking it back a couple months for this feedback from us and then for greater consideration. Moratoriums, I read something about this online, the discussion, or in the newspaper about the discussions that were held at City Council. Moratoriums are not unusual, and they're certainly not unusual in Manitou. We had a very long moratorium when it came to the sex places. We had a long moratorium when it came to the marijuana shops. We had a long moratorium when it came to the vacation rentals. So it's not unusual. I mean, that's actually been in the not too distant past. So I do think that, in my opinion, and I mean this in a collegial way because the city council is great and they work really hard, so it's not a personal thing at all, but I do think that it was somewhat ill-advised not to pass that moratorium. That said, we are where we are. It seems to me that when we put forth a recommendation to the city council, that given that we don't have a moratorium, but we're trying to put in some kind of restraints because we don't yet know what the final version of the zoning code will look like, that in that case, it's incumbent on us to try to be more restrained and careful because we don't want something that would not be permitted eventually under a new zoning code when that eventuates, perhaps in the summer, I would imagine. So to me, Michelle's, I think Michelle, it was a very good idea for her to start this process. I really appreciate that. And I commend her for it, especially given how overworked the planning department is right now. I would say that I would like to, my advice would be, again, to be more restrained. It could be that in 8 months when we have a new zoning code, that more height or smaller setbacks would be allowed. But I would rather err on the side of caution for these 8 months, given that we don't have a moratorium, than erring on the other side that we permit something that will be incommensurate with what will eventually be approvable under new code, if that makes sense. So my proposal, I think, we've all been a part of these discussions for months with about the new zoning code, so this is not totally out of the blue. I would say that I'm still not convinced that the new code will be permitting 3-story buildings all up and down in all of these new districts. That's something that's up for grabs. There's still a possibility that some of those areas would have 2 stories. So my preference when it would be coming to the height would be to limit it to 2 stories at this point. I totally understand that we might want to have an 8 month 3-story building somewhere in that corridor. My view right now, being judicious, would be to have 2-story buildings. That might be something like a 28-foot height, which would permit that, or 27, something like that. I think I would personally be more comfortable with that. And I would echo what you're saying about the setback. I would, again, be more restrained at this point and say 20 feet, knowing that that might change in 8 months. But for right now, without a moratorium, I would be more careful. And I would also echo, and I really appreciate your due diligence as the chair, Alan, to also stipulate that these kinds of lessening of those regulations during this period would not be permitted by the overlay, and that would also that would be changed for that period.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
That the comment about the overlay was interesting. Thanks for doing that. And I think a moratorium is extreme, and I don't think I think moratorium should be avoided at almost all costs unless there's an extreme need. And I agree with Tip said. The 30 versus 35 feet. I mean, they're just arbitrary numbers in my mind. Maybe a way to tackle it would be 2-story max with with maximum of 10-foot interior ceilings or something. If that turns out to be 33 feet, it's fine, but we're just trying to avoid, a massive tower. From an architectural design point of view, I don't know if 30 versus 35 is devastating or if it even makes a difference. But it just seems a more logical approach would be, for now, 2 stories with the maximum interior height. And whatever that turns out to be, it is what it is.
Other thoughts? I think that's an interesting idea. I guess that would be a much more complex change to our current code to say that, whereas just to do an arbitrary height. So, I think that one way or the other, I think we're on board that two stories is sufficient. Tip?
I think that's an interesting idea too, and worth pursuing. If we went the more traditional way, I was looking online today about what other cities and buildings consider to be heights for 2-story and 3 buildings. And, it varies a lot, but I think if you were going to, I think you were saying 10 stories inside for, right? So that, what did you say? 10 feet, 10 feet being 20 feet, and that you need space in between to do blah, 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 then that's why I was kind of thinking like 27 feet or something like that would be ample. It wouldn't be enough, I don't think, for a 3-story building, but it would be ample to have the wherewithal to do interesting things with pitch or this or that, and I think that would be reasonable.
Okay, I guess I'm a little, just from seeing how things get twisted, that we'd have to be really precise on defining what a story was, and, could you have an attic space? So I'm more comfortable just being arbitrary, but, we can all agree one way or the other, or just put all these thoughts in our memo. Do you have any thoughts, Justin?
Just I agree with everyone talking about being more restrictive. I think now is the time to do that. I would also be supportive of a 2-story limitation.
Okay. I notice, our council liaison is here, and since this is not quasi-judicial, if everyone's comfortable, I'd like to have her weigh in on this too, if she wants to say anything.
Hi. My name's Julie Wolf, for those of you who don't know me. Most of you know me. And yes, I'm the council liaison. I think it's helpful that you folks will be advising City Council on your concerns and your views of this. I've been listening to your discussion, and I wondered if it might be helpful, because I really like Mike's idea, but I also see it could be tricky to implement it if we don't have a number. What if we were to find out the average, if there is such a thing, or the mean on what typical height would work for a 2-story home, so that we could maybe translate Mike's suggestion into a height number to make it easier for staff to then implement it or apply it? Just a suggestion.
And what are your thoughts on setback, since that's the other thing we're talking about?
Well, my thoughts are just my thoughts as Julie, not my thoughts as representing all of council, obviously. But personally, since I sat with a number of you for 10 years on this commission, I'm in agreement with what you've said, that we start off cautious and provide a greater setback than is proposed in Michelle's memo. I thought it was a great idea that she even offered that compromise to us. And perhaps 20 feet would work well. And if we can figure out what a height number would be that would reflect a 2-story home with 10 feet ceilings, are certainly generous, then that might be something that would work well. I think it's important to protect the city, because whatever does get built is going to be there for probably longer than most of us will live. So this is a very permanent endeavor if there is going to be some commercial development before we revisit the code. That's my personal opinion.
Tip?
Thanks very much. And the one thing I would say, I do kind of like the idea of 28 feet. There's one thing that it occurred to me when you were speaking, that a lot of these buildings will have offices or stores on the first floor, and then residences on the second floor possibly. And what I was reading about today is that a lot of times the businesses need, and I guess I think this is reasonable, need a little bit more space, so that they might need slightly higher, what you're talking about, like the distance, but that the residents would require less. That's why I do think 28 feet is a reasonable, restrained, judicious number right now, and then we'll see where things are in July. So I would just say, it doesn't have to be that the 2 stories have to be the same height, because they have different functions, and we would want them to have different functions actually in these areas.
Oh, yes. Oh, of course. Yeah, I mean, if you want one floor to have 9-foot ceilings, which is, I have 9-foot ceilings at my home and feels very comfortable. And then maybe you want to have 12 upstairs because you want to have some big fancy thing. I mean, I think we're concerned with the ultimate height of the building at the end of the day, and not how a developer might choose to, apply that limitation. I just don't know myself, personally, my own ignorance, what does 28 feet look like? What does 30 feet look like? What does, so it might help, at least in the discussions, to tie the height number with some idea of what the ceilings would look like, so that the rest of council, so that we can understand what we're looking at with these numbers, so it doesn't seem as arbitrary. So it might be helpful to explain that if you have a 2-story property with 10-foot ceilings, that would typically result in X amount of height total once you're looking at the attic, the insulation, and all of that stuff.
I was thinking about that today when I was going through this material. I think it'd be really helpful in any kind of proceeding and discussion to have maybe some well-known buildings that we all would know that would give us an idea. So, for example, the Happy Cats Haven. I'd love to know what that is. I'd like to know what the hotel that's going up is. I'd like to know. We could probably have about 5 or 6 that would represent different heights to give us those, and then we would all have a pretty good idea in our mind of how we're talking about this.
That's such a simple, fabulous idea. That would help me too. It'll be a little tricky because, when you measure, there's that whole complicated thing on how we do the measurements. And, I think we have to find the average between the low and the high points. And I know Michelle was talking about wanting to improve how that's written in the new code eventually. But at least we could look around and have a sense of what the building feels like and looks like, rather than just looking at some number.
I think for this purpose, we probably could say we just want to see it the height from the street. We're really talking about areas that are on the sides of Manitou Avenue. It's not going to, I don't think that many of these properties go super deep or whatever. So I would be happy just to talk about it and maybe even write this procedure on the basis of from the street up what it would look
And
like.
you'd have to hire someone to measure that? Or how would you get that number? How would we know?
I suspect you could do it on the, for example, when Happy Cats Haven came to us and they gave us the what's the expression, north and south elevation, it's all done to some kind of.
Oh, was it
right,
done
so-
from the street? I
No,
thought
no,
it was
but you
done
could figure,
from,
you could do that from the drawing.
so you could figure it out from the drawing.
Because they all have a certain kind of measurement that you could be applying to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be fabulous. Maybe our experts in the planning department could look at some of those
Karen,
and help
you have
us.
some thoughts?
Also, I think there's a tool for doing that. We could
Yeah.
probably, we don't have it, but probably someone at Pikes Peak Regional, one of their building inspectors,
Yeah.
could do that for us.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, as we're talking, I think I could get behind 2 stories set back at least 20 feet. You know, that could be there's a chance someone could say, I'm going to have 18-foot ceilings and put a second floor on with 14-foot ceilings, and we'd get up higher maybe than what we want, but the chances of that are probably slim. So,
I'd really like to know, though, what 2 stories looks like in a commercial building and what 2 stories, it looks like, not just visually, but to see what the number is, and then to see the numbers for residential.
yeah, I think.
So that we know, it just makes it it makes it more concrete and not as nebulous when we're having to choose some number.
Yeah.
But I think that would really help all of us. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm perfectly happy with my 7'8", 7-foot 10-inch ceiling, so this 12-foot thing is way beyond me. I think my house is spectacular, and I don't understand why we have to get so big and high. So, but anyway, are we suggesting we're gonna do some research? We're gonna have staff do some research? I mean, how are we gonna accomplish getting these numbers, if that's the way we go? It seems to me we're getting pretty complicated, and I'm almost more comfortable being, either coming up with a hard height
Or
So-
maybe we could look, you know how Tip said that he was looking at other cities? If other cities if we can find any other cities that maybe have used stories rather than feet for their height ordinances, maybe we could look at that, copycat, see if some of that seems more workable. Because I know if it's too vague, I can't imagine the city attorney's going to be comfortable with it if it's impossible to clearly, we need to have a bright line on where is it yes or no.
That's why I would be comfortable with a 28. I do think that, one could say that I have a 8-foot story in my house, and I'm happy with that. But I can also understand if a restaurant is there, that they might need a lot more storage space and cabinets. I could imagine if you have a store that you need more places to display what you need. The nice thing about 28 is you could have 12 feet and you could have 9 feet, and then that still gives you ample space to have more. So 28 for a 2-story building seems generous to me. So my preference at this point would be to say 28 feet, they can manipulate it the way they would like. But before we decided that, we would like to see some of these examples from Happy Cats or whatever. I think it can be useful to look at other communities, and I certainly do that. But we also have a very specific topography here and sightlines. So I think since we know the area, that even if we had 4, Karen, as you were suggesting, if we had some tool and we could have 4 different buildings identified, and this is what the height is, and then we could say, well, what would 28 feet look like for a 2-story building? I think that'd be, pretty comfortable, and with the 20-foot setback.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Mike?
Well, since Karen volunteered, kind
Oh.
of, maybe we
Wait.
should ask Karen if she
Okay,
can help
Mike?
us with that.
You could easily determine those heights with the laser and just trig it out easily. Another thing to consider is a flat roof versus a pitched. Most commercial buildings are flat, but I could see somebody, which would be preferred in the overall scheme of things, having a pitched roof, and that will add a dramatic amount of height.
I can't remember, do you know, I'm not that, I haven't used the code as much, but does HVAC on top of a flat roof count as part of the height? I can't recall. When you've got all that stuff on top?
No.
So that visually would still have an impact,
Yeah.
even if it's not counted as part of your 28 feet or whatever the feet
Yeah.
might be, just
Yeah.
food for
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah, but 28 feet with an AC on top would be a lot better than 40 feet, 6 feet from the sidewalk.
Right.
And I think whatever we do, we're basically just giving an opening bid. We're giving our feedback, and staff is going to come up with their proposal based on our conversation and their conversation. It'll come back to us, and if we don't like it, we can shred it and give a different recommendation to council. But I think we've given a lot of great feedback. I mean, staff, do you have any other thoughts or questions, or? Are we giving it, is it enough, or are we just rambling too much?
going to add that I think the height is never arbitrary. It's always based on, as you mentioned, some kind of sense of a commercial building height. In our community, because we don't have regional commercial, we scale that down even more. So it's more of a, it's not neighborhood commercial, but it's kind of commercial suited to our building design types. So we would want to look at kind of what that typical height is. I don't know what it currently is for commercial. I know for residential that Michelle indicated that up to 9 feet, we think is appropriate. I don't know what that standard is offhand for commercial.
And up to 9 feet ceilings? Is that,
Mm-hmm,
okay.
yep. Yeah, not including the plates.
Okay, do you think you have enough feedback from us, from our discussion, to know where we're headed or what our thoughts are?
So you're looking for what you think is a good range for a commercial building ceiling height, including all other considerations, floor, infrastructure in the ceiling. So you'd have the interior space plus the other things that you would require for 2 stories.
Does that fit with what you said, Tip? I thought you
I
said like
guess
2 stories and 28.
Yeah, I guess that I would be even simpler. I would just say no more than 2 stories, no higher than 28 feet, 20-foot setback, and not allowing for this time the overlay to abrogate those,
And no moratorium.
and no moratorium in that situation.
Yeah, I think, council has pretty much voted on that, or had a straw vote that they won't do a moratorium, so that's just not going to happen. So this is our help with them to give our thoughts, and then we'll see a proposal next month, and then that'll go on to council. And then they'll have a first reading and a second reading, so. Julie?
The other thing that I wanted to see if you all are in favor of, when Karen was asking for a recap on what you want from her, if she could also look and see if she could identify 4 or 5 buildings on Manitou Avenue and tell us what the height and what the setbacks are for those particular properties, so that we can look and not just be using numbers, but actually look and see what that feels like. I think that was a good suggestion if Karen could help you all with that. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Actually, a couple of interesting ones that are 2 stories are the Days Inn and Magnuson, that's right at the corner of Crystal Hills Boulevard. Those are 2-story buildings.
Well, the Subway shop is 1 story, and it's massive,
Yeah,
in a good way.
okay. Okay, this is a great discussion. Next item is update regarding the zoning and subdivision code rewrite. And basically, the task force has had their second meeting, and they're doing a lot of really good discussion. It's going a little slower than our original schedule, but we're just basically taking it step by step and having a lot of discussions. So we're right at the beginning of chapter 2, which is laying out the zone districts. Taking the existing code and just putting it in a new location. And as we go through it, we found things that, like, we're trying to get all the procedural things, all the process separated from the description of the zones and the requirements. And so it's as we talk through it, it's making a lot of sense. So that's where we are. Are there any questions? I'll try to answer them, or Denise is here. She could answer if you have more thoughts. So, no questions. The final thing is notice of council action and updates. I think it's here. Dylan, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So ordinance 1421, which is the rezoning for Zero to Pika, which is the vacant lot up on Higginbotham Flats, from hillside low density to park designation, was heard at first reading at City Council on November 2nd, and was approved, and was heard on second reading on November 16th, and was approved as recommended.
Great. Any questions? Mike? Yes.
Dylan, is there anything going on with short-term rentals, that moratorium, you know?
Yes, council last night extended that moratorium through October.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that happened last night was it was the first reading for a increase in the marijuana tax to 10%. And that'll be, the second reading will be the first meeting in January.
So stock up now?
Yes, if you're worried about saving the $4 on your $100 purchase, you better do it now.
And we're down 2 members. Is there anything going on with that?
Oh, well, actually, now we're down 1, because we have out here our new alternate sitting right there, Shannon Solomon, and I believe someone else has applied to be an alternate, but I haven't seen any.
So Gloria Latimer was approved as a regular member.
Yeah, and Justin.
Yeah, and with Shannon and Whitney Lewis, there's only one alternate position available.
Yeah. Okay. No more discussion. We're adjourned.